was married a guy in the program. Tough out there, tough. The thing that I was asked to broach today was the spiritual part of the program. And it's very difficult to talk about something directly over which we have absolutely no input. The spiritual part of the program is one of those things that as you stay here long enough and read the book, which is now published, you'll begin to see there's a lot of sentences in there that you just can't walk away from. In the foreword by the doctor, it talks about the fact that we suffer from a disease over which a necessary belief in a higher power is required. And that if we're going to experience this entire psychic change that we need, we have to get spiritual. And if you read Bill's story, you see that he tried all types of ways to get sober, and it wasn't until he did have a spiritual experience that it took place. And then there are other great lines in that book that say at some point in our sobriety we'll be defenseless, mentally defensive against the first strength. And at that time we're going to have to rely on a power greater than ourselves. And that we suffer from a disease that only a spiritual experience will help us recover from. So there's a lot of sentences in that book that lead you to believe that you have to eventually get involved in the spiritual part of the program. But the people who wrote the book were very gentle, because they knew most of us didn't have a great background in spiritual matters. You can always tell when you're at a spiritual meeting. You know, you go and say, "Is that chair saved?" And the little lady says, "No, but we're working on it." You know, and there's one everywhere. And the deal is that they told us that we could have our own concept of God. We didn't have to take some pre-authorized or pre-approved God. We could develop our own concept. And that if your belief was that you don't believe today, that's okay. That was your concept. And all you had to do was to begin to get willing to believe. My voice is a little hoarse this morning, and I apologize because the coasters were here last night. And although I wasn't old enough to remember them, I did purchase some of their 78 albums. With the little stickers in between. But the deal is that when we talk about spiritual part of the program, a lot of times people get scared. And they develop a lot of apprehension and fear because they bring to it a lot of preconceived notions. And the nice part about the spiritual part of our program is the fact that, as I said, if you're willing to begin to believe, you can begin to get well. And that when most people come in, the last thing they want to do is get spiritual. Although the book talks about it at great length and tries to develop the fact that we should get well from the inside out, that's unfortunately not the way most of us get well. We begin to get well from the outside in. And by that I mean one of the things you do when you come in, it's just like they read today on how we tried to stop drinking. It's join a health club or not join a health club. Exercise or not exercise. Diet or don't diet. You know, smoke or stop smoking. The list could go on ad infinitum. And the deal is that what we basically do is we develop distractions in our lives so that we don't have to look at what's really real. And there's only one reality, and that reality is God. And the book tells us very clearly that there is only one who has all power, and that one is God. May you find him now. And that the deal here is not that anybody's developed an exclusive market in that area, but we're all seeking. And thank God we're not dependent upon our intellectualism. The three words you never want to hear an alcoholic say is, "I've been thinking." particularly if they've had copious time to think. People used to say, you laugh a lot at AA, and people must get insulted at that, that you're laughing at their disease and their problems. We don't laugh at their disease and their problems. That's serious. We laugh at their solutions. And not everything in AA is as it appears. The newcomers come in thinking that the rest of us have all worked something out. It's like the guy who has no arms or no legs, and he shows up at the house of ill repute. And the madam answers the door, and she says, just what do you think you're going to do here? And he says, I rang the bell, didn't I? So a great deal of this is perception, I see people in AA that would have to leave the bar so they could start the happy hour, and they've been here a while. And you see other people, they can turn anything into a positive. It's like the guy who said, my wife cut me down to sex once a month, but hey, I'm not even upset. Some guys she cut out altogether. And the deal is that we come here, and unfortunately for us, we're fastened by chains whose locks we never heard click. And we don't even know it. And we don't even know it. And that's why I get terribly amused when you tell a newcomer that he had a spiritual experience. And he'll say, what do you mean? And I said, I've heard you tell your story as I've heard everybody's story. They're basically the same. And we go along and we tell this prologue of horrendous things that happened to us, and then we end up, all of us, saying, something happened. Whatever that something was that was the motivating force to get us into AA. And I don't want to scare you, but that was a spiritual experience. And you're not the authority on whether or not you had it. I mean, you didn't even know you're an alcoholic. How the hell do we expect you to know? I don't think so. Police. Yeah. And so we come here and we have all this stuff going on that we don't know how to explain, and we don't even know in some cases what we feel. And the people who have been here ahead of us, the trailblazers, Sybil and all those folks who have been here, they gently, in most cases, take us aside and say, look, this is not complicated. The only way it gets complicated is when we try to explain it. This is real easy. What you do is you take the steps. You start to take the steps. And as you start to take the steps, some very basic things begin to happen. Number one, you begin to gain a little humility. Not much. In some cases, only a splash, But it's a beginning. And in that beginning, as you get not only somewhat humble, but you also get humanized. Because for the first time, we're not looking at what other folks have done to us, but rather what we have done to them. And so the process becomes being humbled somewhat, being humanized, and eventually, and if you're not there now, don't worry about it, and eventually realizing that you need a power greater than yourself in your life to do what you have to do. And it doesn't make any difference what the time factor is. Some people get to that early on, some people later on. Don't be discouraged, as the book said. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. We just happen to be willing to grow along spiritual lines. And sometimes we find those spiritual things in other people, you know. You look for Miss Right, or Miss Right Now. And you know that's what God wants you to do. And it makes no difference what she looks like or what she says, as long as she'll go to coffee. And the door is open because now you're beginning to communicate with another human being. And you know, that's one of the reasons we allow people to share at all levels. We allow people to share because we know sooner or later when they're talking, they're going to forget themselves and say something honest. And you can almost tell at a meeting when it happens. You know, you think, it comes out, and it's like they want to gobble it up again. And we have minor breakthroughs in most cases. We don't have major breakthroughs. We have minor breakthroughs. And then we have to go back and repeat certain things because we forget the lesson. The only way you can create a habit is to repeat an act. It's very simple. If you want to learn to love, which is something we all have to get to eventually also, is you have to repeat copious acts of love. You have to be willing not to hold back. That's what this deal is about. See, to the degree that I have held back in my life is to that degree that I've kept myself from growing spiritually. This is flat out. This is 0 to 100 as fast as you can get there. And your fear should never be what the other person is taking from you. It's what you're not giving. And that means getting vulnerable. Terrible word in AA. You know, I want to love you, but I don't want to get close. And I won't even say the big C word, commitment. I won't even say that. But the deal is that in my life, the problems I have encountered is when I've tried to keep something for Ken. See, I wanted Ken to have his own little place. I didn't mind giving up so much, but at some point I wanted to be able to rein it in and say, no, I won't go beyond that. Now, I never said that consciously, but subconsciously that was there all the time. Because to say it consciously would scare off the other person. But I had to have my own little area where I, in quotes, felt secure and safe. My little parameters out of which I'd never go. And I'm here to tell you today it doesn't work that way. Just doesn't work that way. You can try it, have at it. But it doesn't work that way. In the last 18 months, I have probably gone through more internal strife over loss than I've ever gone through in my whole life. I had a sister-in-law die of this disease on Christmas Day a year ago. She went into the hospital with cirrhosis, stayed there for 2 months, and died weighing about 60 pounds, Christmas morning. And we buried her, and it was a very traumatic thing. And then a week later, I went to the New Year's Eve dance out there at the Albar Shrine. And the next day, I got a call at 7 o'clock. My brother had died in an alcoholic convulsion. So we went back east, and we buried my brother right next to my sister-in-law. And my nephew, who had lost his mom 1 week, and a week later, his uncle got picked up that afternoon for drunk driving. So in my family, it's very simply put. We're divided into 2 groups. Either you're in AA or you need it. You know? The only time someone says no to a drink at my house is if they misunderstand the question. And the reality of that is that, sorry to say, I'm the only one of my brood who is sober today. And then several months later, my mom died, not alcohol related. And suddenly I realized I had holes in me. Stuff that I thought didn't exist. I was suave, I was glib, I was humorous, I was outspoken, I was extrovertish. I had all these things going for me, but I had these holes. And the Band-Aids that I had used in the past to patch up those holes just didn't work. I went to meetings. I shared with my sponsor. I did all those things you're supposed to do. And somehow the holes seemed to get larger. And I cried more in that period of time than I ever remember crying in my whole life. And my dad, who when I was quite young died in my arms of alcoholism. I had gone out on a mini date in those days, went to a movie. We didn't know a whole lot. That's why everybody of my era got married with the same two words. We all proposed the same way. You're what? You know? And the deal was, I came home, and my mom said my dad wasn't feeling well, and he walked to go in the other room, and he went down, and by the time I got to him, he was dead. And we called the first aid and the ambulance and tried to do all that stuff, but it was too late. Now, my dad never drank for the first 44 years of his life. I retract that to a degree. I'll qualify that. He drank, but he didn't drink. And he started drinking at 44, and at 50 he was dead. And if intellectualism and knowledge alone were any factor in this disease, I had a chance to observe it, living at home. And I've seen my brothers and sisters get tore up behind this disease and die. And the end result was, you would think that if information were that important, I would have had the information necessary. But again, you know, you have to read this big book. Get your own copy. Don't let your sponsor explain the big book to you. Read it. It's amazing the shit that people read in there. I don't know where they get it printed. And the deal is, it tells us in there that knowledge alone can't keep anyone sober. And so eventually, as I said starting out, you have to get to a point where spiritually you need something else. And you begin to seek that out. And in the beginning stages, oftentimes you don't even know what you're looking for. You're just looking for something else. And then people start to say things like pray. And we have parts of the book that kind of let us know what's ahead. As Bob mentioned the other night in his sharing, it tells us in the book the best years of our lives are ahead. And it also says in there that if we do certain things, we will be rocketed into the fourth dimension. And that we will experience and feel things that we never even thought of before. And that we'll develop the sixth sense. We'll know what's going on without having to feel it, smell it, touch it. And in the promises it says we will intuitively know. We will intuitively know. I looked that word up, being unscarred by education. And one of the things it says is that intuitive thinking bypasses the thought process. You just know. And that's what begins to happen. You know a lot of things without having a great understanding of them. And you begin to realize that what you thought you knew now has to be unlearned. The big problem here isn't to learn a bunch of new stuff. It's to unlearn the old stuff. We had to let go of our old ideas. You know, I heard a guy in New York tell a story about monkeys in Borneo. And he said the way they catch monkeys in Borneo is that they carve out a little cage and they put bananas in it. And the monkeys see the bananas and they come down out of the trees and they slide their hand in and they grab the banana. And in so doing, they make a fist. And then they can't get their hand out. And the natives just simply walk up behind them and beat the hell out of them. And all you have to do is let go of the banana. And in AA, we can relate to that. After you're here 10 years, you can work 2 cages. It's not a case of if that's your banana, it's monogrammed, you know? And it's funny how the natives have been going to family fitness because the pain is intense. And people say, let go. Let go. You, let go. And as my friend Peter would say, hey, yo, let go of me? Absolutely, you know. And we just don't seem to have that quality of letting go. The wheels fall off and we tie them back on, you know. I'll make this bitch run, you know. I'll make it work. I mean, I got a program. No half measures with good old Ken, full throttle. So you start to do. And in the process, the one thing that becomes apparent, without you even being aware of it, is that the only continuity in your life is your sobriety. You turn around someday and you say, wait a second, I've been now sober this amount of time, whatever it is. And the continuity of being sober begins to be your strong suit. A lot of other stuff coming and going, you know, moving around, but the continuity of your sobriety is important. I related to my first contact with God as I understand him when I was about 14 months sober. My wife, very wisely at the time, had left me. She had moved out of state with my 2 sons, whom I loved, and I loved her. And my career was over, and I was faced with the prospect of going to jail. Thank God my career was over. And I was living in a senior citizen place with my mom. Sleeping on a folding bed in the living room. And the youngest person next to me maybe was 70. It was really a honey of a place. Pacemakers everywhere. After a while, I could use the walker good, you know? And I moved out for better things. And I moved into my first apartment on my own. And I had no furniture. And my clothes were in boxes. And I went to a meeting. And my sponsor was there. And he had serious, serious brain damage. No matter what I said to him, he would say, it's good. Wife and kids again. Going to jail. Health is shot. I was afraid to talk to him. I figured if he's the leader, you know. But I moved into this apartment. And it's ironic how this program works out again, coincidence. I have a friend sitting over here who saw me through that whole period. We got sober at the same time in the same place, together, and now we live across the street from each other 17 years later in San Diego. It was just a coincidence. And I went to this meeting, and I came home, and I had bought a bed from the Salvation Army, and I got into bed, and I said my prayers, which I had started to do at that point, and two things happened to me, which I'll never forget. The first one was I realized I was sober. Through all that had happened to that point, I was sober. And the second thing was, it wasn't that it was going to be all right, but more importantly, it was all right then and there. I was okay. I was alive. I was totally in that moment. I had nothing to hide from anyone. I had been stripped of all ego and pride. Anybody who knew Ken at that time knew the story. And the deal was, that's when I was the best. And as I've gotten sober in some areas, I've moved away from that point, because you want to start looking good again. At that point, I had no choice. People would see because they knew what was going on. I had gone. This story has no impact to you folks, but one of the things I did near the end was I went over on the Parkway, a bridge in New Jersey called the Edison Bridge. And it is 8 lanes going north and 8 lanes going south. And you go through a toll and you pay the guy a quarter, or you throw it in a machine. Well, I went through the wrong way, having got on the Parkway off-ramp. Was he surprised? And they didn't send any troopers because they didn't have any that sick. And they just waited for me on the other side of the bridge. And I thought I was having, at that time I didn't know what a spiritual experience was, but I remember a voice saying, Buick, pull to the side of the road. And I thought, God, they know I'm coming. And the deal at that point was, having nothing, I was at the best point in my life. And you try to figure that out. Having absolutely nothing but sobriety, I was at the best point in my life. I had one little Hummel that my wife had let me keep because it was a gift from my family. And it was worth something. Not a lot, but it was worth something. And when people used to come in to my place, I had orange crates. And I would say to them, sit down, because you had to sit on the floor. I had no furniture. I would say, sit down gently so as not to hurt that Hummel. And my sponsor, God love him, he knew exactly what I needed. So he came to visit and bought me some coffee, and I gave him my little pitch about, sit down carefully, I don't want to hurt that Hummel. At which point he picked it up and threw it off the wall. And it shattered all around the room. And he said, you don't have to worry about shit. And he was right. I could go out and leave the doors, windows open. They broke in, they take an orange crate. In that neighborhood, they break in, they probably leave something. Look around and think, holy God, this guy's in bad shape. And I was separated from my wife for a period of 14 months, going back and forth out of state to see my kids. And we eventually got back together again. And we had a good run for about 10 years. And I want to tell you this story because my friend who's in the room knows the incident I'm going to refer to. But we say a decade of miracles. I went to an AA meeting and met a guy. And I liked him because he wore a suit. I didn't even have a Hummel. And so I said to him, why don't we go and do meetings together? And he said, fine. So we developed a little bit of a friendship. And then one night I heard someone share that you should have a sponsor. And I said to him, how would you like to be my sponsor? And he said, I haven't even got 90 days. He said, I was only here a little bit ahead of you. He said, so if you want to go to meetings with me, that's fine. But get yourself another sponsor. Get someone who has more time. And I did just that. And several months later, I had to appear before the grand jury had said something was bad about me. So I looked back, they were mostly women. And the deal is, I had to go before the county prosecutor. And when I walked into the county prosecutor's office, it was this little bozo that I was going to meetings with. Now, hell, that sounds like it's a big thing. There's only like 10, 12 million people in that area. And there's only like 60 or 70 assistant prosecutors. The odds are in my favor. That's the way I was betting at the time. I had a good horse at Aqueduct that same day. Took 7 other horses to beat him. Eddie was riding, he hit the horse said, what the hell are you hitting me for? There's nobody behind us. The jockey has a movie of the ride. So I walk into this office, and this guy is sitting there, and he says, well, what's the deal? Well, of course, I was rigorously dishonest. And he said, we're going to have to get the detective involved in this who's handling the case. So they brought him in. And it was a guy I played football with in high school. And he looked at me and he said, I'm not going to kid around. Here's what we got. And he showed me this deal. He said, if you want to work it out, I'll help you. He said, but if you're going to deny it, I'm going to get off the case. He said, because I don't want to be the guy who puts you in the sneezer. So he started to walk out of the room, and you get those blushes every once in a while. And he said, what is it? And I said, I didn't do it, And I lied. And he walked a little bit further and started to close the door, and I said, you better come back. There might be some semblance of truth to that. So the 3 of us in concert sat down, and we worked that thing out so that I pleaded guilty and took a walk. And financially made restitution for that incident, which took me somewhere about 8 years into my sobriety. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Newcomers are saying, oh my God, did he say that? It was the best thing that ever happened to me. because once again it gave me an ongoing reminder of the way it was like. You know, there's a tendency sometimes, none of this will affect you folks, but it affects me. But there's a tendency sometimes to have the landing craft hit the beach, and you're under a lot of fire when you first get here. But you just keep moving forward, and you get so far away from the beach you forget the shell fire. And then you begin to think you know something. So you start helping others who would be better off if they didn't know you. And the things you can't do in your life, you start to project into their life. I went to a meeting, one of the first meetings I went to in California. It had nothing to do with California. It could have been anywhere. And I heard a guy before the meeting. I got there early because I thought I'd meet a couple of people. And I was trying to introduce myself because I was new. And what they were saying is this one guy was buying tires for his car. And he had looked at like 15 different tire places. And then he didn't know whether he wanted to get white walls or black tires, or whether he wanted retreads or new, or whether he wanted steel belt or... This guy couldn't make a decision about anything. And then he said, here's my baby. Like the Searchers. And this young man walked in, and in 5 or 10 minutes, I overheard him say, you should quit your job, leave your wife, and stop dating your girlfriend. Now, here was a guy who was willing to share, who was still out looking for tires. You have to be real careful who you ask shit around here. I mean, there are folks here who think Moby Dick is a venereal disease. You know? And you never want to try to put down an alcoholic. I was at a meeting one time where a guy who had a lot of education took a newcomer and tried to roast him in front of the rest of us. And he said, you're so dumb you can't even name 2 pronouns. And the guy said, who, me? So a lot of what goes on here goes on in what I call the ether. It's real easy to have a well-balanced personality, mentally well-balanced personality. All you have to do is forget your troubles the same way you forget your blessings. That's real easy. And you'll stay permanently mentally balanced. And you don't necessarily have to seek out this power greater than yourself. You can go it alone. We give silver bullets for those folks. Because sooner or later you're going to get to a speed bump in the road of life, and you're not going to know what hit you. And everything you think you know no longer works. And as was mentioned last night, and I was glad Sybil shared it, because when people with that amount of time say it has more impact, and that is, this program isn't worth a hoot unless it works when the times are rough. If this is just sunshine and flowers, a lot of us are in the wrong place. This has got to work when the going gets tough. And that's when it does work. And it works because you've been doing the right things for so long, you don't even know you're doing them. You don't even know in many cases you're doing them. And the best way to help yourself through a crisis in AA is go do something with somebody else. Don't sit home and think. You know, don't read books. Go do something with another alcoholic, because in going through their whirlwind with them, you'll be okay. The greatest law of compensation in this world is you cannot sincerely give of yourself to another human being without reaping a profit, even though that wasn't your motive. You can't do it. God's got the game rigged. You do something for someone, he does something for you. It's just the way it works. I had a business here in San Diego that I tried to make work for years. I couldn't get anything to fit. I mean, when I first got here, everybody thought I was in the mafia. Then after I was here a while, they knew I was. And so everybody kind of held you at bay, particularly when they hear you talk. You know, they know you're no down-home boy. Particularly when you ask for water. And I couldn't make this work. And then a whole lot of things I won't bore you with happened in my life, and my whole life changed. And instead of trying to build my empire, I went and did other things. It was totally amazing to me how I had created a routine in my life for security. Routine can be very secure. That's why we get upset when someone wants to alter it. Routine can hold you captive. You got to break out of it. You got to completely break out of routine. It's all right to be organized, but you can over-organize. And there's a lot of security in knowing I'm going to do this Tuesday night and that Wednesday night, and I'm going to go here, and my car does this, and I eat this food, and you get your whole life together. That's not where it's at. I don't want to scare you, but that's not where it's at. Where it's at is living on the edge. Life should be more than an interlude before death, you know? Someday your closest friends and you are going to go to the cemetery and they're going to come home without you. You know? And that's the way it is. And no one will say, hey, yo, what do you do in life, you know? It's over. I've gone to 7 funerals, as I said, in the last year and a half. And the one thing that struck me, just danced at me, was that every headstone was basically the same. It had a name on it, it had when you were born, and it had when you died. And it didn't make any difference how long the person had lived, there was just a little dash in between. And that's us. We're the dash. And not to be morbid, because I don't see it that way, but to be very, very aware. I want to live every second of it. Live, not exist. There's a hell of a difference between being secure and being held captive. And a lot of times you can confuse the two. And a lot of times we sell ourselves cheap to the moment. You know, if I only had this job, if I only had $400, if I only had whatever it was, rent money. We sell ourselves cheap. That's not our purpose. We belong to a great group here, Alcoholics Anonymous. We have a great saying, and that is that we only have one requirement for membership: desire to stop drinking. We have no dues or fees. We don't endorse anything. And the nice part about us is that we write a lot of times on the front of podiums, our primary purpose is to be there. Be there when somebody else is in need. That's my job now, see? My job isn't to be secure. My job isn't to hang out and suck up oxygen. You know? It's not to be a consumer of the world's goods. In getting sober and in taking the steps, I've become much more aware of a big job that I have. My job is beyond imagination anymore. And it is beyond imagination. I'm supposed to be doing stuff that I never even knew existed. I'm now doing stuff that I didn't know happened. You know? And it's all good. And as I started to tell you about this little business, I couldn't make it work. I mean, I survived, but I couldn't make it work. And then when I started doing all these other things that had nothing to do with my business, it was like somebody was just running around throwing it at me. And I had a guy came in, he had a big car, big business card. It was in 1982. And he came in and he said, I can follow you around for a month, watch everything you do, and when I leave, I'm an efficiency expert, I'll be able to increase your productivity minimum 30%, probably 45%. I said, wow. He said, now let's start off with some basic facts. Where do you get your clients? I said, from God. He said, can you run with that? And I said, yeah. You see, I have a little deal. No sense boring you with the details, but I go do something over here. Totally unrelated to what I do here. And when I come back, something's happened here. While I'm out soliciting drunks, more or less, somebody's prospecting for me and bringing me business. More business than I need, actually. I got to talk to God. Well, he left. Rather abruptly. Didn't even take his card. But that's the way it works. See, the mystery here is when we try to explain it, we can get so far into it and then we get lost. It becomes very trivial. But I can tell you in my mind, I've been to places. And I've seen things that scare me. And they scare me in the sense because when I experience them, I have to come back and live here. But sometime in our life, that will not happen. At some point, death, which I believe to be the most democratic thing we have, because everybody gets hit the same way, you know? I don't give a shit if you have the gold card, you know? God. And what it has done for me, and that's all I can share, is it's let me know that I don't have forever to get done what I should be doing. I can't walk away from someone and not say I love you if I love them. Because I may not get that chance again. I can't pass up an opportunity to do things that I know I should do. Because I may not get that chance again. And in the loss of my loved ones over the last year and a half, the nice part about it for me was we had that rapport. We didn't leave anything unsaid. And you don't think this thing works in other areas. I volunteered to work in the hospice program here in town. And the first case they sent me out on, working with people who were terminally ill, was a guy who lived in Spring Valley. And he was sitting on his porch and he was very angry over his situation in life. He only had 4 or 5 months to go. And I said to him, you know, I said, I'm new at this stuff. I want to be here for you. I want to help you. I just don't know how real good. This is new to me, too. I said, if you tell me what you want to do, I'll help you out as best I can. Hold back nothing. And his comment to me was, you wouldn't understand. He said, but I have some things that I just think are real important to me, and you won't understand them. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he knew Tex and Sybil. And he said, I can't get my cake because I'm not strong enough to go to the meetings in the evening. And I want to take my cake. So I said, at that time he was on heavy medication. And I said, you load up on that stuff. And I'll take you into no man's land, noon at the Grove. And so he loaded up, and we went. And there are at least a dozen people in this room today who are at that meeting. And he got up and gave just a little 5-minute pitch about AA. Never mentioned where he was at. Never talked about the fact that his sin was running out real fast. And then he sat down. And we went back to his place. And he lived another whole year. And I gave him another cake at that meeting, his 40th. And he was very feeble then. And I had a chance to see this guy laying down do more than most people do standing up. I used to have a lot of guys who called me, I still do. We don't play the sponsor game, we just call each other. I looked in the book, I couldn't find a sponsor. I guess it's there. In the chapter to the know-it-all. But guys used to call me and say, Ken, she's leaving. Ken, I lost my job. Ken this, Ken that. And I'd say, I can spend some time with you, but I got a commitment to this guy, and we got to go see him first. So I'd haul him over there. And this guy had tubes up his nose, and he was in bad shape. And he would say heavy stuff like, go to one meeting. Try one meeting. Just go to one meeting. And it's going to be all right. And then we laugh, and I'd say, now tell me about your problems. And funny how their problems kind of dissipated. This is good stuff here, folks. And it's real easy. And it's all based on love, which is the most powerful force in the world. And don't be afraid of being vulnerable. You can't get hurt. You may feel a little pain sometimes, but what you experience is so much greater than that. And we just come to expect that stuff. We just come to expect it. My mom used to tell a story, if I can get through it, and it's an Irish story. Doesn't mean anything, it just happened to be Irish. But it was real simple. And it kind of sums up a lot of spirituality for me. And that is, she used to tell about this boy who was about 8 or 9 years old. My mom told it great with an Irish brogue. And this boy, Johnny, used to go to parochial school. And next to the parochial school, of course, was the church. And Johnny, every day before school, would run into the church. And he'd kneel down in the back, out of everybody's way, and he'd say, hello, God. This is Johnny. I just wanted to tell you I'm here. And he'd boogie out and go to class. And then when school let out and all the other kids hit the playground, he would go into the church first. Kneel down and say his little prayer. Hello, God, this is Johnny. I just wanted to tell you I'm here. And he did this winter, summer, in school, out of school, weekends, holidays. That was his spiritual thing. And as the story goes, about 12, he contracted polio. And he was dying. And the room was filled with his mom and his dad and his brothers and sisters and school chums and friends. And they were all huddled around the bed. And my mom used to say, a voice was heard to say, hello, Johnny. This is God. I just wanted to tell you I'm here. And that's the essence of the whole deal. being there. There's a lot of times when you're drinking, you can't be there. And there's a lot of times when you're sober, you need help. And what we find out here is there's never a time when you can't give help. And in the giving is the getting. So if you have someone today who, for some reason, whatever it is, major, trivial, has gone out of your life, you're not talking, you feel you're entitled to some anger or some resentment or whatever it is, forget it. Forget it. Give them a call. Surprise the hell out of them. And just tell them you were thinking of them. And that whatever was is no more with you. Whether it is with them, that's something else again. But whatever it was is no more with you. Because our time is all running. And we just don't know. And next year, a lot of us who are in the room today won't be here for one reason or another. Some of us just won't come to the convention. Some people will be sick. Some people will have family members sick. Some will die. Some will get drunk. See, we can't afford to miss the opportunities. It's too important. And someday, when you get to that river where you have to cross over, and like I was in 1970, stripped of everything, you'll be carrying more than you need. I want to thank you for letting me share. God bless you.